A ticking clock once held more power than a king's army. This is the hidden story of Europe's rival clockmaker networks, a secret war fought not with swords, but with gears. The precision of a timepiece did not just measure hours, it measured political influence, and the masters of these mechanisms worked entirely in the shadows. By the end of this, you will understand how a handful of artisans secretly redirected the flow of European history itself. How did a technical drawing stolen from a monastic workshop alter the outcome of a war? Why would a pope trust the election of his successor to the accuracy of a single clock? You are about to see the medieval world in an entirely new light, where time was the ultimate weapon of control. What does it mean to truly hold power over time? The deep, resonant bell of a monastery clock did more than just call monks to prayer. It announced a new age of order, a rhythm imposed by machinery. Inside these quiet cloisters, the first true mechanical clocks were born, their heavy iron gears and crude verge and foliate escapements turning the fluid passage of a day into a series of measured, countable ticks. This was the escapement, a simple yet brilliant device that released the clock's power in tiny, regulated steps. It transformed time itself from a natural cycle of sun and shadow into a resource that could be managed, controlled, and owned. Powerful institutions took immediate notice. For the church, these clocks synchronized prayer across entire regions, centralizing spiritual authority. For kings and queens, they standardized the working day in growing cities, fueling commerce and tightening administrative control. But these intricate machines of iron and brass were not self-sufficient. They demanded constant, expert care. This urgent need created a new kind of master artisan, the clockmaker. Their knowledge was so rare and so vital that it granted them an unprecedented level of access and quiet influence. They became the unseen guardians of a new form of power, and it was within the first great hubs of innovation that their secret alliances began to form. Within the stone walls of a Cistercian abbey in Champagne, the rhythmic ticking of a monumental clock was the heartbeat of a new order. Monks and skilled lay brothers worked side by side, their hands assembling intricate gear trains that could not only tell the hour but track the complex dance of planets across the heavens. These towering astronomical clocks were marvels of their age, born from a need to perfect the divine schedule of prayer, yet their influence swiftly escaped the abbey grounds. The same bell that called the faithful to vespers began to signal the opening of the town market. The clock's authority, once purely spiritual, now dictated the tempo of commerce and daily life for everyone outside the monastery walls. This gave the church a subtle but profound form of control over the surrounding society, a power rooted not in doctrine but in precision. To protect this advantage, the monastic workshops became fortresses of knowledge. Their technical drawings were treated like sacred texts, locked away and shared only amongst a trusted few. This created the first true clockmaking network, an insular and secretive guild that understood the value of what they possessed. Their monopoly on measured time established a powerful template, proving that the master of the clock could quietly master the world. But such concentrated power never goes unchallenged for long. A new kind of rival was already emerging from the bustling, secular cities, ready to seize this tool for their own ambitions. While the monastic workshops guarded their secrets in secluded abbeys, a very different kind of power was ticking to life in the noisy, cobbled streets of the Holy Roman Empire. Cities like Nuremberg and Augsburg were not places of quiet prayer, but thriving hubs of commerce and fierce independence. Here, clockmaking broke free from the church's shadow. It was no longer a sacred art but a lucrative trade, mastered by secular guilds of craftsmen who answered not to a pope but to the demands of the market. These urban artisans created smaller, more intricate clocks for wealthy merchants' homes and grand public masterpieces that crowned the town halls, their faces becoming symbols of civic pride and municipal authority. The clock on the cathedral belonged to God, but the clock on the Rathaus belonged to the people and to the men who governed them. The guilds themselves were formidable organizations. They controlled every aspect of the craft through rigid apprenticeships and uncompromising quality standards, ensuring that a timepiece from Nuremberg carried a reputation for excellence across Europe. But their influence extended far beyond the workshop. A master clockmaker in this new world was not a monk in a cloister. He was a burgher, a full citizen with property and a voice in the city council. His technical expertise translated directly into political power. He could sway decisions on public works, on trade regulations, and most importantly, on which projects received funding. The guilds became political machines, and the ability to measure time was their currency of influence. This fundamental shift from religious to urban control ignited a silent war. The old monastic networks, with their spiritual authority, now faced ambitious, profit-driven rivals who understood that time was not just a divine rhythm, but a commodity. The battle for technological supremacy would not be fought with swords, but with carefully guarded innovations. Each side developed their own secret weapons, tools designed to lock in their advantage and lock out their competitors. The most powerful of these were exclusive contracts and the early, shadowy precursors to patents, legal instruments that could make or break an entire network of craftsmen. A royal patent was far more than a piece of parchment. It was a key that could lock an entire territory's timekeeping into the hands of a single craftsman. Consider a clockmaker from Augsburg journeying to the court of a powerful duke. He does not merely present a new clock, he demonstrates a revolutionary spring-driven mechanism, smaller and more reliable than anything the duke has ever seen. In his petition, the clockmaker requests an exclusive privilege, a legal monopoly granting him the sole right to build and sell this new technology within the duke's lands for a period of 10 years. On the surface, this seems like a simple business arrangement, but it was a profound political maneuver. For the duke, granting this patent meant his court, his army, and his administration would gain a critical technological edge over rival states, all while binding a brilliant artisan to his service. For the clockmaker and his network, it meant they could freeze out their competitors, whether they were monastic workshops or other urban guilds, from the most lucrative market in the region. These agreements were often shrouded in secrecy, their full terms never entering the public record. This secrecy created a hidden web of technological dependencies. A prince's entire schedule, the coordination of his couriers, the timing of his tax collections, even the moment his troops would march, could now hinge on the continued cooperation and exclusive skill of one clockmaking faction. The strategic use of patents was how these artisans transformed their technical genius into unshakable political influence. They became indispensable. But locking down a territory was only one side of their covert strategy. The other involved a far more fluid and dangerous game, the silent movement of their most valuable asset, knowledge itself, across heavily guarded borders. A master clockmaker arriving at a royal court carried not a product but a vision. His proposition was for an astronomical clock, a mechanical universe of moving planets and chiming angels, designed to be the wonder of the age and a permanent monument to his patron's enlightenment. The negotiations that followed were a subtle art, a delicate fusion of flattery, breathtaking technical demonstrations, and unspoken promises. The clockmaker offered far more than a machine. He offered immortal prestige, a symbol of a modern and powerful state that could command the very heavens. In return, he sought more than gold. He negotiated for a permanent position as the court's horologist, a noble title for his son, and legal protection for his entire network of artisans back home. A single, successful deal, such as one famously struck between a Habsburg archduke and a master from Augsburg, could elevate an entire guild standing for generations. It granted them access to the inner chambers of power, immunity from local laws, and a quiet, profound authority over the court's own timeline. These artisans could now influence the scheduling of coronations, the timing of treaty signings, and the pace of diplomatic receptions, all by maintaining the clocks that govern them. This slow, courtly infiltration was a masterstroke of soft power. Yet another, more urgent form of influence was already in motion, one that involved not the pageantry of peace, but the precise, unforgiving timetable of war. A general's most trusted advisor in the hours before a battle might not have been his senior knight, but the quiet artisan who maintained his campaign clock. Inside the command tent, amidst the smell of oiled leather and damp wool, a finely crafted portable timepiece sat beside the battle maps. The entire plan, the synchronized advance of infantry from the woods, the moment the cavalry would charge, even the precise instant for the cannonade to begin, all relied on the steady, mechanical heartbeat of that single instrument. The clockmaker who supplied and calibrated these devices held the army's schedule in his hands, a position of invisible but immense power. A master aligned with one kingdom could ensure its regiments moved with a unity its enemies could not match. Yet the temptation for subterfuge was ever present. There are records, whispers really, of certain craftsmen selling nearly identical clocks to both sides of a conflict. To one general, they delivered a masterpiece of accuracy, while to his opponent, they provided a device that looked the same but lost a few critical minutes each day, a flaw subtle enough to escape immediate notice but devastating in its consequences. An artillery barrage that begins a fraction of an hour too late, a flanking maneuver that arrives a few minutes too early. These were the failures engineered not by poor strategy, but by deliberate technological sabotage. The clockmaker's influence could thus decide the outcome of a siege or a battle without anyone ever knowing they were on the field. This manipulation of martial time was a terrifying new frontier of warfare, yet it was merely a prelude to an even broader form of control, one that would reshape the very foundations of commerce and daily existence across the continent. The rhythmic pulse of a trade fair was governed by a single public clock. Picture the sprawling market in Frankfurt, a chaotic symphony of merchants and money, all starting and stopping their business at the clear ring of the town bell. The clockmaker entrusted with that mechanism did not merely tell time, he commanded the city's entire economic heartbeat. This position allowed for a form of sabotage so subtle it was almost invisible. A rival guild or a disfavored merchant consortium might find their market day mysteriously shortened. The clock would run slow, delaying the opening bell just long enough for their competitors to secure the best customers. Or it would be taken offline for sudden, urgent repairs right before a critical auction, throwing their schedules into disarray. These were not acts of grand theft, but quiet adjustments made with a screwdriver, manipulations that were impossible to prove and devastating in effect. By controlling the public timeline, a clockmaking network could influence everything from currency exchange rates to the price of grain, deliberately funneling wealth toward their allies and away from their enemies. The incredible economic power this generated did not just buy luxury, it funded the next, more dangerous phase of their operations. This river of gold financed a clandestine arms race, paying for spies to infiltrate rival workshops and for the theft of the very designs that kept their networks ahead. A pouch of gold changed hands in the flickering candlelight of an Antwerp tavern, sealing a bargain that would compromise a rival guild's most precious asset. The agent from one network was not buying a physical object but information, the secret technical drawings for a revolutionary fusee mechanism. This was the brutal reality of technological espionage, a shadow war fought with bribes and stolen parchments. The fusee was a brilliant innovation, a cone-shaped pulley that used a chain to equalize the force of a clock's mainspring, granting smaller timepieces an unprecedented level of accuracy. Possessing its design meant breaking a competitor's monopoly and securing a lucrative royal contract for your own patrons. Guilds and their backers maintained networks of spies whose sole purpose was to infiltrate workshops, befriend journeymen, and bribe clerks to reveal the contents of secret patent applications. The stakes were so high that kidnapping was not off the table. A master craftsman with unique knowledge of a new escapement might simply disappear from his home city, only to reappear months later in a rival duke's employ, working under heavy guard. This theft of human talent was often more valuable than any stolen blueprint. The loss of a single key artisan could cripple a workshop for years, stalling their innovations and weakening the political faction they supported. This relentless, underground struggle transformed every technical advancement into a double-edged sword. A new gear design was both a commercial triumph and a security nightmare, a secret that had to be protected at all costs. The constant pressure to innovate faster than your rivals could be pushed the boundaries of metallurgy and mechanics, but it also fostered a culture of profound and deliberate obscurity. To protect their hard-won secrets, clockmakers began to build deception into their very craft, intentionally designing their masterpieces to be incomprehensible to any outsider. The most important timepiece in Christendom was not built to tell the hour, but to save the soul of the calendar itself. By the 15th century, the Julian calendar had drifted so far out of sync with the solar year that Easter was arriving on the wrong date, a profound embarrassment for a church that claimed authority over both the spiritual and the natural world. Correcting this drift required a clock of impossible accuracy, one that could track the sun and stars with unwavering precision over decades. This technical crisis made the Vatican the ultimate prize for the rival clockmaking networks. A German master, backed by the powerful guilds of the Holy Roman Empire, would arrive in Rome with elaborate designs, only to be countered by an Italian artisan from a local network, each promising the Pope a mechanical solution to a theological problem. The competition was fierce because the reward was not merely a contract, but a permanent voice in the highest corridors of spiritual power. The network that succeeded in placing its clock within the Apostolic Palace did more than just fix the calendar. They wove their own technological rhythm into the fabric of the church itself. Their mechanisms began to govern the most sacred of schedules. The ticking of their masterwork would set the pace of a papal conclave, the sealed gathering where cardinals elected a new pope. Could the subtle speed or deliberate slowness of that clock influence the deliberations, perhaps forcing a rushed decision or allowing a faction more time to gather support? The masters who controlled the maintenance of that clock held a quiet influence over the very future of the papacy. This was power on a cosmic scale, where a gear-tooth alignment could subtly sway the direction of the entire church. To protect such a sensitive position, these artisans had to become masters of another art, the art of confusion. They designed their Vatican clocks to be beautiful, baffling labyrinths of brass and steel, where the true principles of their operation were hidden behind a veil of unnecessary complexity. This deliberate obscurity was their final, most powerful defense, ensuring that their influence over the timeline of faith remained an unassailable secret. Run your finger along the ornate brass case of a 15th-century chamber clock, searching for the craftsman's name. You will find only smooth, unmarked metal. This empty space is not an accident of history, it is a calculated silence. In an age where master artists proudly signed their altarpieces and sculptures, the finest clockmakers deliberately erased their identities. A clock without a signature was a ghost, an instrument of influence that could not be traced back to its creator or the network that supplied it. Imagine the strategic advantage this provided. A duke in Milan might receive a magnificent astronomical clock as an anonymous gift, a tool that perfectly synchronized his court's activities. He would never know it was crafted by a network secretly aligned with his rival in Venice, a network that now subtly controlled the tempo of his diplomatic receptions and military preparations. If the mechanism were to mysteriously gain 10 minutes before a crucial treaty signing, hurrying his decision, there was no one to hold accountable. This blanket of anonymity protected the artisans from the wrath of powerful patrons, allowing a single workshop to serve kings, popes, and merchant lords simultaneously, all while hiding their true alliances. It was the ultimate strategic defense, transforming each beautiful timepiece into a deniable asset. Unraveling this web of intentional obscurity is the historian's great puzzle, a trail of breadcrumbs that leads not to a name, but to a profound and sobering philosophy of power. These masters understood that to be known was to be vulnerable, and that true control resided in remaining forever unseen, their legacy ticking quietly on, authored by a ghost. The deep philosophical rift over free will and determinism was quietly engineered into the gears of the clocks themselves. In a Strasbourg workshop, a master might design an astronomical clock showing the planets moving on a fixed, unchangeable track, a perfect model of a universe governed by divine law. This was the preferred design for networks aligned with conservative, theological courts. Their clocks were sermons in brass and iron, reinforcing a patron's belief in a predetermined, hierarchical world where every event, from a king's coronation to a harvest's failure, was part of a celestial plan. But just a few cities away, in a Nuremberg guild hall, another master was creating something entirely different. His clock featured a jousting automaton, where two knights charged each other on the hour in a spectacle that felt thrillingly unpredictable. This celebrated humanist ideals of agency, skill, and surprise. The choice of which clock to install in a prince's court was never neutral. A deterministic timepiece subtly encouraged a more fatalistic, conservative approach to governance, suggesting that the established order was immutable. A clock filled with whimsical automata, however, promoted an atmosphere of ambition and possibility, encouraging a patron to believe he could forge his own destiny through bold and unpredictable policies. This ideological weaponization of technology meant that a clockmaker was not just selling a machine, he was installing a specific world view into the very heart of power. To coordinate this subtle campaign of influence across vast distances, these rival networks needed a communication system as intricate and hidden as the clocks they built. A hollow compartment, expertly carved into the base of a gilded chamber clock, was the true masterpiece. This hidden space did not contain gears or counterweights, but a tightly rolled parchment, its surface covered in a cipher of numbers and symbols. As that clock traveled north from Venice to Paris in the care of a trusted merchant, it was not merely a luxury good being delivered, it was a courier on a critical mission. These coded messages were the nervous system of the clockmaking networks, coordinating their far-flung operations with a speed and secrecy that kings could only envy. A message from Augsburg could warn a master in Brussels that a local duke was considering a patent for a rival guild, allowing him to dispatch a counter-proposal before the official announcement was even made. Another might instruct a cell of artisans in Lyon to suddenly raise their prices for spring-driven table clocks, a coordinated act of market manipulation designed to bankrupt a specific competitor. The clocks themselves were the perfect disguise, their functional beauty deflecting all suspicion. No customs official would dare dismantle such an expensive and intricate device, and even if he did, the compartment was often hidden behind a false gear or a panel that only opened with a specific sequence of presses. This system turned every trade route into an information superhighway, allowing the networks to act as a single, intelligent organism. They could shift craftsmen across borders to fill sudden vacancies, sabotage a rival's supply of brass by buying up local mines, or prepare for a political upheaval that would create a new patron. Their power was no longer just in the clocks they built, but in the invisible web of knowledge they spun across the continent. This flow of intelligence gave them a prescient ability to navigate the turbulent waters of European politics, always staying one crucial step ahead. Yet this very dependence on secret information created a new and terrifying vulnerability, a single point of failure that could unravel an entire network in a matter of days. The Dukes of Burgundy did not simply collect art, they weaponized it. In the 15th century, their court was a theater of power, and the most spectacular actors were not people but clocks. Duke Philip the Good surrounded himself with masterpieces of Flemish clockmaking, intricate brass and gold automata that did far more than mark the hours. As diplomats and rival nobles looked on, these mechanisms came to life. Miniature knights jousted on a polished stage, mechanical birds sang from gilded cages, and orreries of moving planets demonstrated a cosmic order with the Burgundian duke at its center. Every whirring gear and chiming bell was a declaration. It said that this court was the pinnacle of sophistication, a center of technological marvels that outshone the older kingdoms of France and the Empire. This was not a hobby, it was a core strategy of statecraft, and the Flemish artisans who built these wonders were his most valuable allies in that silent war. In return for their genius, the Duke granted the Flemish network a formal monopoly. His seal protected their workshops, his treasury funded their research, and his influence cleared their trade routes of any competition. Rival clockmakers from the Rhineland found themselves suddenly locked out of Burgundian markets, their shipments delayed by suspicious officials and their patents mysteriously overturned in ducal courts. The Flemish masters grew immensely wealthy and powerful, their success inextricably tied to the rising star of the Burgundian state. Their clocks became the rhythmic heartbeat of an expanding empire, ticking in time with the Duke's own ambitions. Yet this perfect symbiosis carried a terrible risk. When the last Duke, Charles the Bold, fell in battle, his vast territories shattered. The Flemish network, so dependent on his singular patronage, found itself adrift almost overnight. Their protected status vanished, their trade routes were severed by new borders, and their rivals descended like vultures. The fate of an entire technological faction had been hitched to one man's political destiny, and his fall was their collapse. This dramatic story reveals the ultimate vulnerability of these secret networks. Their power was immense, but it rested on the shifting sands of courtly favor, a lesson that would not be lost on the next generation of masters seeking a more permanent form of influence. While the Dukes of Burgundy fell with their patron, a far more resilient power structure was being built not in a palace, but in a bank. In the heart of Renaissance Florence, the Medici family understood that gold was the ultimate gear in any machine of influence. Their vast banking empire became the silent engine behind a new wave of horological innovation. The Medici were not mere collectors of beautiful clocks, they were venture capitalists of time. They identified the most brilliant Italian and South German artisans and provided them with something more valuable than a single commission: a steady stream of capital for research and development. This funding allowed these masters to experiment for years on more precise escapements and smaller, more reliable portable designs, freeing them from the constant scramble for their next meal. In return, the Medici gained a strategic monopoly on the resulting technology. This was a partnership of pure pragmatism. For the bank, an accurate clock was a tool of immense financial power. It standardized the complex interest calculations on international loans, synchronized the arrival and departure of their merchant ships and couriers across Europe, and brought a new, ruthless efficiency to their accounting ledgers. Every minute saved through better timekeeping was a minute that could be leveraged for profit, but the Medici vision extended far beyond their balance sheets. They ensured that their allied clockmakers supplied the most advanced campaign clocks to their political allies, like the Sforza dynasty in Milan. A better clock meant a better coordinated army, and a victorious Sforza duke was a duke who remained deeply in the Medici's financial debt. This created a perfect, self-reinforcing loop. The profits from banking funded the clockmaking research. The advanced clocks improved banking and military logistics, and that enhanced power generated even more profit to pour back into innovation. The Medici did not need to build the clocks themselves. They simply owned the timeline upon which all other power operated. Their genius was in recognizing that in an age of expanding commerce and conflict, the most valuable currency was not gold, but precision itself. A third of Europe simply vanished. The Black Death did not just leave fields empty and cities silent. It shattered the very foundations of the medieval world. In the wake of such unimaginable loss, the old certainties of feudal obligation and divine providence crumbled. Yet from this devastation, a strange and powerful opportunity emerged for the clockmaking networks. The plague had created a desperate labor shortage, making the surviving skilled artisans exponentially more valuable. A master who could train a new generation was worth his weight in gold, and his knowledge became a form of capital that could be invested for immense returns. These craftsmen were no longer just artisans. They were a scarce and critical resource, and they knew it. They could now demand higher wages, travel where they pleased, and negotiate for privileges that would have been unthinkable a generation before. Their mobility and bargaining power surged, transforming the networks into agile, high-stakes operations. This scarcity also ignited a frantic search for labor-saving innovations. Why rely on 10 men when a single, brilliant mechanism could do the work of 20? The pressure to automate, to build clocks that required less frequent adjustment and fewer skilled hands for maintenance, pushed the technology forward at a breakneck pace. But the plague's impact was more than just economic. The collective trauma made society profoundly receptive to the clock's message. After such chaos, the idea of a predictable, mechanical universe, governed by reliable gears and not by a seemingly fickle divine will, offered a comforting new kind of order. The clock became a symbol of a world that could be understood, measured, and controlled by human reason. The networks that survived the pestilence did not just recover, they were reborn into a world now perfectly primed for their unique form of power. They emerged with their skills more coveted, their influence more deeply rooted, and their mechanical world poised to become the new orthodoxy. This hard-won strength would soon be tested on the grandest stage of all, as the continent's most powerful families began to consolidate their power, and the great dynastic wars of the Renaissance began to take shape. The long war between England and France was secretly a duel between two competing clocks. Behind the marching armies and burning fields, rival networks of artisans engaged in their own relentless campaign for technological supremacy. The English forces, fighting far from home, depended on sturdy, spring-driven clocks crafted by a coalition of Flemish and German masters whose fortunes were tied to the English crown. These portable timekeepers were essential for coordinating the devastating chevauchées, the fast-moving raids designed to cripple French territories. The precise timing of these strikes, from the moment horsemen left their hidden camps to the instant they converged on a surprised town, was dictated by the unwavering tick of these imported mechanisms. Meanwhile, the French court and its military command drew support from a powerful consortium of Parisian and Lyonnese clockmakers. Their devices regulated the mustering of feudal levies across the kingdom, ensuring that distant lords and their knights arrived at the rendezvous point not days apart, but within hours of each other. In the slow, grinding theater of siege warfare, this technological rivalry reached its peak. The entire schedule of a siege, from the rotation of night watchmen to the synchronized advance of sappers digging towards the walls, was a dance choreographed by clockwork. A French network might supply a fortress commander with a magnificent new tower clock, only for an English-backed master to attempt its sabotage through a bribed craftsman or a deliberately flawed repair. The value of a reliable timepiece was measured in the most stark terms imaginable. An ambush that began 5 minutes too soon could alert the enemy and turn a certain victory into a bloody rout. A failed synchronization between archers and men-at-arms could collapse an entire battle line. In this hidden conflict, the clockmakers did not just serve the war, they became indispensable to its outcome, their influence ticking quietly beneath the roar of cannon and the clash of steel. A Portuguese caravel's captain squints at the stars, knowing his ship's position is a dangerous guess. His map showed a clear route to the Indies, but without a way to measure longitude, his vessel was sailing blind across an endless ocean. The greatest obstacle to global empire was not storms or sea monsters, but the simple, terrifying inability to know where you were. This crisis created the ultimate prize for the rival clockmaking networks. Whichever faction could solve this puzzle would hand their royal patron dominance over the world's trade routes. The solution was a seaworthy clock, a marine chronometer that could keep perfect time despite the violent rocking, salt spray, and extreme temperature shifts of a long voyage. If a clock on a ship could maintain the exact time of its home port, a navigator could compare that to the local solar time and calculate his longitude with precision. It was an elegant concept, but for centuries it was an impossible dream. The delicate verge escapements and complex gear trains of land-based clocks were useless at sea, gumming up with rust or stopping entirely with the ship's first heavy roll. Yet the networks, driven by their competitive rivalry and the promise of unimaginable wealth, poured their collective genius into the problem. They experimented with new materials like brass to resist corrosion, designed novel balance mechanisms to counteract motion, and built heavily weighted gimbals to keep their creations level. Each failed prototype in an Augsburg workshop, each partially successful test in a Venetian arsenal was a step forward. They were building the foundation, brick by experimental brick, for a technology that would not be perfected for another 300 years. This relentless, secretive research and development, funded by kings desperate for a nautical edge, meant that the great age of discovery was not just launched by sailors and soldiers. It was quietly underwritten by the clockmakers whose hidden war for European timelines ultimately stretched their influence across the entire globe. A carefully guarded secret could now be printed on a single sheet of paper and sold for pennies in a Frankfurt bookstall. The rise of the Gutenberg press did not just spread ideas, it shattered the very foundations of the clockmakers' power. For generations, their influence had rested on a monopoly of specialized knowledge, intricate gear designs and escapement secrets passed in strict confidence from a master's lips to a single apprentice's ear. Now, those same diagrams were being typeset, inked, and distributed across the continent in technical manuals and pattern books. This was a revolution that cut both ways. For a young, ambitious artisan in a small town with no guild connections, these printed schematics were a key to a locked room. He could study the Fusee mechanism or the Stackfried regulator without ever serving a decade-long apprenticeship in Augsburg or Nuremberg. This explosion of accessible knowledge fueled an incredible burst of innovation, as fresh minds from outside the old structures began to experiment and improve upon the established designs. Yet for the entrenched networks, this was nothing short of an existential crisis. A trade secret that had guaranteed their wealth and political access for a century was suddenly common property. Their primary weapon, hoarded knowledge, was being neutralized. The response from the old powers was swift and strategic. They could no longer rely on simply knowing something others did not. Instead, they shifted their focus to controlling the ecosystem around the craft. They began to aggressively define and enforce technical standards, creating official guild certifications that declared which springs, gears, and alloys were considered acceptable. A clock might be built from a printed diagram, but if its components did not bear the official stamp of a recognized guild, no respectable prince would allow it in his court. They tightened their grip on the sources of high-quality brass and specially tempered steel, creating material shortages that could cripple an upstart competitor. Most crucially, they doubled down on their relationships with the elite. Their new value proposition was no longer just technical secrecy, but guaranteed quality, political reliability, and exclusive access to the most powerful patrons in Europe. They transformed from secret-keeping cabals into the official, sanctioned gatekeepers of precision, an adaptation that would ultimately determine which networks survived into the modern age. A new kind of time was being preached from the pulpits of Wittenberg and Geneva. The seismic split of the Reformation did not just divide souls, it fractured the very philosophy of timekeeping, forcing every clockmaking network to choose a side or risk annihilation. In Protestant cities, the clock was stripped of its mystery. Guilds in Zurich and London now produced instruments of stark clarity, with large, legible dials and a single, authoritative hand. This was time for the individual, a tool for personal discipline, punctual prayer, and efficient labor in a world where every moment was a gift from God to be used responsibly. The ornate celestial charts and saintly automata were gone, replaced by a mechanical honesty that mirrored the new emphasis on scripture alone. Meanwhile, the Catholic courts of Madrid and Vienna doubled down on spectacle. They patronized networks whose clocks were symphonies of theological theater, filled with processions of apostles, chiming angels, and resurrecting Christs. These were not mere timekeepers, they were tools of counter-Reformation propaganda, dazzling the faithful with the glory and complexity of the traditional church. A master's survival now depended on his perceived faith. A Calvinist artisan would find every door in Rome slammed shut, while a Catholic loyalist was persona non grata in Calvin's Geneva. This was no longer a simple commercial rivalry. It was a holy war fought with gears and mainsprings. The workshops of Europe had become arsenals, producing not just the hour, but the very identity of the warring confessions, their ticking a constant reminder of a continent torn in two. A king no longer needed to negotiate with a secretive guild, for he could now build his own temple to time. The 17th century saw the rise of a new kind of institution, the Royal Observatory. In Paris, King Louis XIV founded the Académie Royale des Sciences, and in England, Charles II established the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. These were not workshops for crafting individual clocks. but state-funded laboratories dedicated to a single, monumental goal: to define time itself as a national standard. Their great telescopes and precision instruments were aimed at the heavens, not to create beautiful automata, but to find an absolute, unchangeable measure of the hour that would be the same for every citizen across the entire kingdom. This was the ultimate centralization of power over time, a direct challenge to the fractured, competitive authority of the old networks. Why would a monarch bother with the political intrigues of an Augsburg guildmaster when he could employ a salaried academician, a man whose loyalty was to the crown alone? The state was absorbing the clockmaker's function, transforming a private art into a public utility. This new, state-sponsored time was impersonal, uniform, and backed by the full force of law. It was the time of naval chronometers for the royal fleet, the time of tax collection, the time of official court proceedings. The very success of the clockmaking networks had created a tool so essential to governance that the state had no choice but to seize control of it. Their brilliant, secretive craft had built the cage that would eventually confine them. The independent master, once a power broker in his own right, was slowly being reduced to a technician in a state-run system, his influence fading with every tick of the royal clock. This transition did not just change who held the power, it fundamentally altered the nature of time itself, from a contested instrument of influence to a monolithic tool of control. The gears of a king's astronomical clock had to mesh with a perfection measured in the width of a human hair. This impossible demand for accuracy, fueled by the rivalries of secretive networks, forged the very discipline of precision engineering. The relentless competition to build a more reliable timepiece for a powerful patron pushed clockmakers to invent new tools and techniques that would outlast their own hidden war. To cut a gear that would not lose a second over a month, they needed lathes of unprecedented stability. To craft a mainspring that delivered constant force, they required methods for tempering steel no one had previously imagined. Their workshops became the birthplaces of the micrometer, a device that could measure tiny variations in metal, and the dividing engine, a machine that could etch perfectly spaced lines on a brass circle for a clock's dial. These were not just tools for telling time, they were the fundamental instruments for building a world of exact measurement. The knowledge accumulated in these guild halls did not fade away. It migrated. The same craftsman who perfected a gear-cutting technique for a cathedral clock in Prague might later apply that skill to crafting the precise lenses for an astronomer's telescope in Padua. The art of creating a nearly frictionless bearing for a clock's rotating shaft found a new purpose in the navigational sextants that guided ships across oceans. This was the quiet, monumental legacy of their struggle, the ruthless pursuit of political influence through superior technology. In the end, gifted humanity the mechanical foundation for the scientific revolution and the industrial age. Every complex machine that followed, from the steam engine to the modern computer, rests upon a bedrock of principles first established by clockmakers trying to win a silent war for the corridors of power. That quiet, relentless ticking rewired the human mind. Before these rival networks saturated Europe with their mechanisms, time was a fluid, organic thing. It was the stretch of a shadow across a field, the slow arc of the sun, the crow of a rooster at dawn. Life moved to the rhythm of the seasons and the needs of the body, not the demands of a machine. The great achievement of the clockmakers was to implant their mechanical heartbeat into the very center of authority. Every town hall clock financed by a merchant guild, every astronomical clock installed in a royal court, was a silent teacher. It conditioned an entire population to think in segments, in hours and minutes, to see the day as a series of boxes to be filled rather than a continuous flow. Punctuality was no longer just a vague courtesy you might offer a social superior. It became a rigid expectation. To be late was to defy the new order, to waste a resource that now belonged to your employer, your king, or your god. This was a revolution in social discipline. The peasant farmer answered to the sun and the rain, but the city clerk answered to the bell. The monastic clockmaker, synchronizing prayer, and the urban guildmaster, synchronizing commerce, were unwitting partners in this vast cultural project. Their fierce competition to control the timelines of the powerful did not just decide who won a contract or influenced a battle. It forged the invisible cage of the modern schedule. We are the inheritors of that hidden war. Our morning alarms, our 9-to-5 workdays, our frantic race against the clock, these are all echoes of a conflict fought by artisans centuries ago. They gave us the tools to measure our lives with incredible precision, and in doing so, they convinced us that time was something we could own, manage, and lose. The most profound power they wielded was not over princes, but over perception, crafting a world where the clock's authority feels as natural as the air we breathe. The most sophisticated clock in the Burgundian court simply vanished from the historical record after the year 1477. Its intricate brass automata and revolutionary escapement are described in glowing detail in a duke's personal inventory, but the physical object itself has been erased. This is not an isolated case. Across Europe, the archaeological trail for these secretive workshops is frustratingly thin. These were not permanent factories of stone and mortar, but fluid, temporary operations set up in borrowed manors or within a guild member's own home, designed to be packed away and moved at a moment's notice. When a network felt threatened or a project was completed, they would dissolve, leaving behind little more than wood shavings and the faint scent of oil. The fate of their greatest masterpieces is one of history's quietest puzzles. Were these clocks deliberately dismantled by their creators to prevent a rival network from reverse engineering their secrets? Could a magnificent papal timepiece have been melted down for its raw brass during the sack of Rome, its revolutionary gears reduced to cannonballs? The sheer number of clocks documented in royal wills and city accounts that have no surviving physical counterpart suggests a systematic, deliberate disappearance. This creates a ghost architecture in our understanding of technological progress. We know the leaps happened, we can see their influence in later, surviving designs, but the crucial transitional prototypes, the true masterworks, are gone. Even more haunting are the clocks that do survive, yet offer no answers. In a museum in Prague sits an astronomical clock of breathtaking complexity, its dials tracking lunar cycles and solar years with an accuracy that seems to defy its early date. Yet no court record, no guild ledger, and no signature can confirm who built it. The craftsmanship points to a German tradition, but the mathematical principles suggest an Italian influence. Was this the product of a rare, secret collaboration between two rival networks? Or was it the work of a single, unknown genius whose name was scrubbed from history by his own patrons to maintain his anonymity as a strategic asset? These silent, magnificent machines are the ultimate testament to the network's success. Their deepest secrets were not just protected by ciphers and hidden compartments, but by the silent earth itself. For every conspiracy we have uncovered, a dozen more manipulations and technological coups likely occurred, their stories buried with the masters who engineered them, leaving us with only the echo of their ticking. We have journeyed through the hidden history of a Europe where the quiet tick of a clock masked the loud ambitions of rival artisan networks. From the rhythmic silence of monastic workshops, these masters of mechanics stepped into the fierce light of royal courts and the competitive clamor of city guild halls. Their weapons were not swords but patents, Their battlefields were not open plains but the hushed corridors of power, and their espionage targeted not castles but technical drawings. They subtly bent the very timelines of popes and kings to their will, influencing everything from the outcome of distant sieges to the spiritual fervor of the Reformation. While their era of shadowy, direct influence eventually waned, absorbed by state observatories and printed technical manuals, their true legacy is the world they built for us. It lives on in the unforgiving precision of our machines and in the relentless, scheduled pace that governs our modern lives. Their story is a powerful reminder that genuine power is not always held by the most visible figures on the throne. Sometimes the ultimate control belongs to those who master the fundamental, invisible systems, like time itself, that structure everything else. The next time you feel the pressure of a deadline or glance at your watch, remember you are witnessing the echo of a secret war fought with gears and mainsprings, a conflict that quietly forged the future of a continent. If these tales of clandestine clockmakers and their hidden influence captivated you, consider subscribing to uncover more stories of the unseen forces that shaped our world. We would love to hear your thoughts on this secret history in the comments below.